Gnomes are my favorite species in D&D, and they are often tied to my favorite realm in D&D, the Feywild. This week is Fey Week, where content creators across YouTube are going to be making videos about the Fey. This is being led by Pointy Hat and Jenny D, two of my favorite content creators. And the Fae is maybe my favorite thing overall about D&D. I love the Fae. It's been in all of my campaigns in one way or another. So I want to talk about something I'm very passionate about, which is gnomes in the Fae. So gnomes in D&D are known to be creative, playful, very mechanically inclined, intelligent, and a little bit mischievous. They are often called the forgotten race in D&D because they are known to live in smaller communities and they often operate behind the scenes. So they're inventing things for adventurers, they're not adventuring. They might be helping with study, they might be making potions for them, they might be making little trinkets or tools, but they're not really at the forefront of a lot of adventure. To the point where forest gnomes are very reclusive. So they live in the forest of places like the Feywild, and they don't interact much with other races. Now, the backstory of gnomes in D&D is not completely solid. Some believe that gnomes were created from gems that held their souls, and then they were enslaved by kobolds. A lot of gnomish history includes enslavement, and that is why they honestly don't get along with kobolds when they are known to get along with other races like elves, who took them into their homes and taught them magic when they were on the run from the captors. But today I want to focus on gnomes in the Feywild, so Fey gnomes. Forest gnomes are often very closely tied to the Feywild. Like I said, they live in the forest of the Feywild a lot of times. But the only real stat block we honestly get for something that's even similar to a gnomish Fey is the Redcap. Redcaps are small, vicious creatures that are seeking bloodlust or to satiate their bloodlust. And they look like gnomes. Are they gnomes? I don't really think so. I think they're like creatures created from like mushrooms or something. It's a weird side thing. But red caps, given their name, wear red hats. And once they kill a victim, they dip their hat in the blood to prolong their life. So without dipping their hat into the blood, a red cap would eventually disappear. Now, this doesn't really fit the structure that we often see with gnomes. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about making a Fey gnome stat block. Now, if we wanted to, we could just make a forest gnome stat block. Like I said, forest gnomes exist within the Feywild already, but instead I want to make a stat block for something that is very close to my heart, the garden gnome. To do that, we're going to really quickly talk about the lore of gnomes in real life. So some believe that gnomes lived underground and would help propagate plants, so they would help plants flourish by moving through the soil. Others believe that gnomes were sensitive to sunlight and would turn to stone if they were exposed to it, which explained why they were garden gnomes. They believed that these gnomes would come to life at night to help gardens, to do chores around the house, to do good deeds, and often to carry out mischief, so to play pranks on others. At some point, the lore of gnomes and dwarfs seemed to overlap a little. They were both known to be good with their hands. Gnomes were really good tinkerers, dwarves were really good at stonesmithing and metalsmithing. Dwarves were great miners, gnomes were good jewelers. Like, there was a lot of overlap there between the gnome and the dwarf lore. So let's spend a moment talking about what I want to see out of a garden gnome stat block. I want these gnomes to be chaotic good. They protect gardens and they enjoy carrying out good deeds, but they also like to play pranks. It's just a gnome thing. I want to give gnomes the false appearance trait. When they remain completely motionless, they are indistinguishable from a garden statue. If a creature is within 5 feet, they can make a DC 13 perception check to be able to tell that it is a living creature and not a statue. A creature can repeat this check each round until they figure out which garden gnome is a living garden gnome. And I think that just makes a lot of sense. I would like to think that these garden gnomes have like copies around to throw people off of their scent. So some people might not believe that these garden gnomes actually exist because they're all garden gnome statues. But they're garden gnome statues because garden gnomes don't want people to know that they actually exist. So it's a little bit of a mystery. I also want these garden gnomes to have phase step as an ability. Now I'm going to change the phase step a little bit. It's not going to be like the Ladwin where they get an additional effect when they phase step. It's going to be that if they are not being absorbed, they can teleport 30 feet to an unoccupied space. If they're being absorbed, they can't do that, but I would like them to be able to teleport when nobody's looking just to mess with people. Like I said, they like to play pranks. So maybe you're walking and then you see a garden gnome that looks a lot like a garden gnome you just saw, but you think it might be a different gnome. But was it there a second ago? I want these gnomes to make people second guess themselves. Also, mostly for pranks, I want these gnomes to be able to mimic animal sounds and humanoid voices, similar to what a hag can do. Anyone that hears these sounds can understand it's an imitation with a DC 13 insight check. And this is mostly for pranking, like I said, but it would also be a good way for them to draw somebody's attention away from something else. So if a player is looking for a garden gnome, maybe the garden gnome makes themselves sound like somebody else, so they go into a room to search, and then they can use that phase step ability to get 30 feet away from this person. Like other gnomes, the garden gnome should have gnome cunning. This gives them advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma checks against magic and magical effects. I think it also makes sense for garden gnomes to be able to speak to small or smaller animals, like the forest gnome cousins. I just think a garden gnome would be friends with like a squirrel or something. So I just really like the idea of that. The garden gnome won't be as magical as forest gnomes, but I still want them to be able to use the minor illusion cantrip, mostly to create fake garden gnomes. So they can create a fake garden gnome to the side and then teleport away when somebody is investigating that garden gnome. It's not foolproof, but it might buy these garden gnomes a little bit of time to just run. For a drawback, I want to give these gnomes disadvantage in sunlight, so sunlight sensitivity. So they will have disadvantage on attack rolls and perception checks while they are in direct sunlight, or while their target is in direct sunlight. That just makes sense with the whole gnomes turned to stone, they were nocturnal, helping the gardens and everything. I think that just makes a lot of sense. Stats wise, they should have high dexterity, decent intelligence, decent wisdom, and good charisma. Honestly, I think the charisma is mostly because they are just little guys and they're kind of adorable. Now, for attacks, I only really want them to have a bite attack and maybe a claw attack because I don't think they should have weapons. You could give them a weapon if you have them carrying like a small pickaxe or something. It's definitely an option, but I think my garden gnomes, I just want them to be unarmed. I think it makes it harder for people to tell that they're a threat. You might be asking how you can play garden gnome, but I don't think we need to make a new Fey Gnome playable species. The forest gnome fits that mold perfectly. It says in the lore that they live in hidden communities, sometimes in Sylvan Forest, which would be the forest of the Feywild. They're adept with trickery and illusion. They can speak to small or smaller animals like I want the garden gnome to be able to do. If you want to differentiate your forest gnome from one that was born in the material plane, I would talk to your DM about doing this aesthetically. I love giving the Fae weird eyes. Maybe they are all of the colors of the rainbow, or maybe they shift between different shades of the same color. So, one minute there'll be a dark blue, the next moment there'll be a very light blue, and then maybe like an sapphire blue, and then they just shift between these colors all day. Your gnome could also have unnaturally colored hair, maybe the skin shimmers in the light. You could play into the beauty of the Fae by playing a gnome that has flawless skin and the hair always falls perfectly on their head. And they just don't have any imperfections because they are just the most beautiful gnome you've ever seen. They could smell like fresh flowers or sweets or baked goods. There are honestly so many options when you're trying to aesthetically make a gnome a Fey gnome. Honestly, I think the main thing is you don't want to change anything mechanically, you just want to change things visually. I would recommend just having fun with it and making sure that your DM is fine with all of this stuff. I'm sure there are DMs that don't want to change anything past what the book they're using says you should do. But I think it's a fun twist to put on there to give your character a little bit more flavor and differentiate them from the material plane gnomes that everybody already knows and loves. So that is my video about playing as a Fey gnome using the forest gnome stat block, but more so about making a garden gnome in D&D. Something that I think would fit really well with the Fey aesthetic and really well with the gnome aesthetic. So thank you guys for watching. I really encourage checking out other videos people have released during Fey Week. There's been some great things. I watched a video yesterday about why trolls are inherently Fey, and it was an incredible video. I wish I remembered the name of the creator that posted it. And shout out to Pointy Hat and Jenny D for making this Fey Week thing happen. I tried to do Dragon Week when that was happening, but I think I released my video a day late. So I'm happy to hop onto this, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time, guys. Peace.